Mike Haridopolos is a Republican congressman from Florida's 8th Congressional District. He's joining us from the Sunshine State. Congressman, welcome back to the briefing. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Steve. Great to be with you again.
So where do things stand? Is the SAVE Act at the moment going to be shelved?
Well, as you know, in the House, despite a micro majority that we hold at this point, we were able to pass the SAVE Act under the basic assumption that let's go through those voter rolls and make sure that only Americans are voting in elections. And second, as you know, Steve, 14 states don't require photo ID when you go and vote, which is, again, when you talk to everyday folks, or like I had done the last few days back in my district, they can't believe that you don't have to show an identification before you go and vote, considering you have to show identification to do just common things such as board an airplane or even buy a beer.
So you say photo ID, but it's also requiring a passport or a birth certificate. Democrats claim that this is just a way to suppress the vote. What do you say to that?
I think it's insulting to married women and to minorities that say they can't acquire this information. As you know, people get married every single day, and women go in to their voter office and change their name, et cetera. It's not a difficult process. They navigate it quite easily. And I think the same holds true here, where it's not a voter suppression item. It's simply saying, let's make sure that all the right people are able to vote. As you saw, Steve, in the last 4 years prior to President Trump coming back into office, you saw somewhere between 8 and 12 million people enter the country. Let's make sure that Americans vote in elections. And in my home state of Florida, they have many different databases that can quickly discern, one, if you're an American citizen, and two, if there's any voter issues, they can quickly rectify it. It's one of the first things I did when I got back in the district. When I talked about the SAVE Act, I sat down with my supervisor elections. I said, here are some concerns that the Democrats have expressed, and they walked me through very quickly how easy it is for you to go to your local supervisor elections, and if you have a name change, you can do that, and or if you want to verify if you're an American citizen. And so it's a pretty simple process, and I think this just has a lot to do with politics as opposed to what's really happening here.
But the other issue, as you know, Congressman, is the issue of states' rights. And you can imagine that there will be lawsuits against this if it passed and if the president signed it into law. So what about that issue? What about states and local communities running these elections without the being dictated by the federal government?
No, Steve, I'm glad you asked that question because, as you know, I'm a history teacher before I became a congressman.
I know.
And I wanted to look back at our history. And so think about it. Congress has always been involved with elections. Going back to 1845 is when we standardized the idea that congressional elections take place in November, after the harvest and before the winter. And even go back more recently with the different voter rights legislation that was passed in the 1960s to affirm the ability for African Americans to vote in the South. Of course, we had the 14th Amendment, the 19th Amendment to allow women to vote. We allowed, of course, with the amendment to our Constitution to allow 18-year-olds to vote. So it's always been a part of Congress to be a part of the system. It doesn't mean we take away states' rights, but we do affirm that you have basic standards to make sure that people who are legal and able to vote do actually vote. And we affirm the idea of one person, one vote. And so Congress has always played a role, but I am excited to see the Democrats take an interest in the 10th Amendment, states' rights. It's the reason why we think we should have some opportunities to work on education programs in that same regard, and even transportation programs to give more flexibility to states. But Congress is always going to play a role in voter rights and to make sure that the right people are voting. And I mean the right people. I mean people who are legal and able to vote. And if they run into a challenge with that issue, if they're worried about being registered, it's a quick visit over to your supervisor's office if you're concerned about it. And I know Republicans and Democrats in my community, at least, work very closely with our nonpartisan supervisor of elections.
So let me ask Mr. Haridopolos, the professor, the teacher of history, on the filibuster, because it's an interesting debate that we're seeing right now. As you know, it dates back really to 1789, when the idea of trying to stop the debate first began in the Senate, but really came into play in the 1830s and 40s. Now there's the debate, including Senator John Cornyn, saying let's eliminate the filibuster. As somebody who understands how Congress works, is there a concern that if the Senate ends its filibuster, the Senate will look just like the House?
Well, this is the challenge that they're running into right now. As you know, in essence, for anything to pass in the United States Congress right now, you need 60 votes. It's that cloture is a very important mechanism. But what the filibuster was designed to do is to give rights to the minority so they would have a voice on legislation they might oppose. It does not mean that you absolutely stymie all votes. And so I think what we'd all like to see is what I'd like to see they call the talking filibuster. I think senators should get on the floor and defend each side of their position and let the American public hear that debate. As you know, there's not much going to be passing anyway in Congress right now. There's plenty of floor time, as we can see, in the Senate for them to have this national debate about what the rules should be for elections. I'm okay with adjusting that filibuster law because, you remember, as you know, we changed the law as far as affirming judges or presidential appointees. That system changed a few years ago when the former Democrat leader Harry Reid was in place. So there have been changes, and I just think people want to see votes on some of these things as opposed to just accepting out of hand they don't have 60 votes. And just like you and I wouldn't call it you and I having a debate right now, but I would say that a lot of the misconception, this idea that somehow this is Jim Crow 2.0, clearly haven't studied history either. Jim Crow denied a complete group of American citizens the right to vote and participate in America. This is something different. This is just the opposite. We want as many Americans to come and vote as possible. Let's just make sure you're legally able to do so here in America.
Congressman, the war is going to cost tens of billions of dollars. According to early estimates, the first 2 days, $5.6 billion spent on the war. Is the White House, will the Pentagon come to you and say, we need X amount of dollars, and what will that process look like?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they do have a supplemental to work on this, but this is, again, short-term pain, I think long-term gain, in the sense that, as you know, as again, going back to history, 1979, Iran has been a thorn in the side, not just of the United States, but the entire region. They are the state sponsor of terrorism. They have cost thousands of American lives and untold people in that region because of their, let's just say, sadistic activities as they fund evil. And so the president has given them every opportunity to simply say, we will help you rebuild your economy. We will help you do all types of things with energy production. But you need to give up this dream of getting a nuclear weapon. We just don't trust you with the nuclear weapon. And of course, what has the Iranians done? They've every time they stalled, delayed, lie, cheat, steal, and so we can't trust them. And so this whole region has basically said to Iran, we've had enough of you. It's not just Israel and the United States. It's Jordan, Kuwait, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain are all have had enough of Iran and their aggressive nature that has caused so much unrest in the region. And so, yes, there'll be some cost to this in the short term, even on gas prices, as we're seeing, no doubt about it. But let's be clear, if we have a stable Iran, whatever they choose to move towards after this conflict is over, it is better for the world. And that means we'll spend less in the long term on military if we're not always having to deal with this terrorist state right in the middle of where we produce a lot of the energy in the world.
So one final question, again, really appreciate you being with us. Mike Haridopolos, he's a Republican from Florida. What if this means boots on the ground, troops on the ground in or around Iran?
Well, I think we've taken a pretty strong position, and we're not in the nation-building exercise. You know, this is about thwarting a real threat in the region. I think that the reality is that Iran was building up the capability with their missile system and now the drones to make it where they would be so strong in a defensive position, they might start rebuilding that move towards a nuclear weapon. We do not support boots on the ground. The president has said so, in my opinion, as far as what like we did in Afghanistan or Iraq. What we are trying to do is eradicate an evil regime that has caused mayhem since 1979. And we're optimistic that we can create some stability here, and it'll work out in the right way. But this is a real challenge. But let's just also be clear. During the Joe Biden years, we had much higher gas prices, huge inflation. We're trying to handle things. And the good news for Americans is the inflation rate is still under 2.5%. The stock market is booming. And we're seeing nations around the world invest in America like never before. So we've made progress. Still a long way to go to bring down those
We'll
prices.
leave it there. Congressman, thank you so much. CBS News.